Okay, welcome everyone to our webinar today. It's the title of our talk is AI in the Arts, Navigating Artificial Intelligence with Creative Makers and Thinkers. My name is Kimberly Black. I'm the Associate Director for the Center for Information and Security Education and Research, and I would like to give a brief introduction to our esteemed speaker today. Professor Darrell Nickolson is an associate professor at the Herron School of Art and Design at the Indiana University. On the Indianapolis campus, where he specializes in instruction of architecture and interior design graphics. His pedagogical and research initiatives are centered at the intersection of evidence-based design and building information modeling, with a particular emphasis on the complexities of large-scale commercial environments and the theory of placemaking. So I would, like to welcome Professor Nickolson and, take it away, sir.
Thank you so much. Appreciate the time, everybody. That introduction makes it sound like I know all these great things. So I guess I gotta live up to this, right? Okay, so I'm gonna share my screen here. Okay. And okay. All right, so hopefully you guys can see my slides here and hear me clearly. So yes, as the introduction stated, I'm going to talk a little bit about using artificial intelligence while working with creative makers and thinkers, right? So I teach in an art school, and it is a very creative place to be in right now with artificial intelligence being kind of what it is in higher ed. It's an interesting time, right? And so um, what this presentation kind of centers around is a couple of projects that I've recently been working on where we're exploring the role of artificial intelligence and enhancing the teaching and learning environment and trying to see where it fits, right? Where it fits and where there's a comfort level with not only the instructor, but the students as well, right? So my name's Darrell Nickolson. My students call me Professor D. But I started this presentation off with this graphic. So this little graphic of me here, my wife actually created that using AI, right? And so we were at home one day and she was just playing around with this AI tool. And this was probably the week before I went and spoke at the conference in San Diego. And I said, I'm going to use that graphic. And I shared it with my 16-year-old daughter, and she said, Dad, what is with this graphic? It looks ridiculous. It doesn't look like you at all. And I said, well, I don't know that the goal is for it to look like me, but the goal is for it to tell a story about me, right? The entire graphic, not just the picture of me, but the entire graphic, right? So it talks about me being, you know, a dad, which is the biggest role that I have, right? In addition to being a husband, but I'm also a design thinker. And so design thinking is one of those areas where, if we're not careful, artificial intelligence can kind of take over that field. And we really don't want that to happen. So the goal is, how do we make it such where that doesn't happen? So what we're really talking about is, what are the tools that we're going to be using moving forward, not only just in design thinking, but specifically as it relates to my fields in architecture and interior design, because we're talking about vertical structures and we're talking about, taking very creative people and trying to not squash their level of understanding about where their creativity fits into the world, but where we can enhance it. So we're talking about generative design software, virtual reality tools, which we see everywhere now, right? The VR tool is, something that is kind of taken over a lot of different industries. Building information modeling, or BIM, which is where I kind of fit into this field, right? Because BIM has been around for quite some time. And it within itself is an artificial intelligence tool that allows us to kind of see the finished product of buildings and study them in their longevity before they're even in existence. And we can kind of learn a little bit about the mechanical systems, the electrical systems, and how they're going to flow and interact with the evolution of the building and its users, even so much so that we can estimate electrical bills and heating and cooling bills and that kind of thing. So, and it's been around for quite some time. We just didn't refer to it as artificial intelligence. We just called it BIM, right? And then the AI-driven project management tools. And that is a huge part of my discipline right now, because once a building is designed, and now we're getting into the project management of that thing actually taking place. And it's funny because as I give this presentation right now, I'm looking out my office window, and right across the courtyard from the art building, our campus is building a new athletic facility. And I was just sharing a story with my students a couple of weeks ago that as I watch all these contractors walking around this project site, I don't see any of them carrying drawings. But 20 years ago, you see them all walking around with these massive sets of drawings. And it's just another reminder of how project management has changed. And they're all walking around with iPads and tablets, trying to figure out, are we putting this building together the right way, right? So it's an interesting time that we're living in terms of how design is impacting how we do what we do. So what that means is, as we're revolutionizing the design landscape and we're enhancing creativity, right? We're streamlining the process and fostering this innovation in the fields of architecture and design, right? So I went back and did a little bit of research. And so from 1997 to 2014, AI citations went from 0 to 7%. And while that might seem like a small number, um, you have to remember that artificial intelligence was still relatively new toward the back end of that research window, right? And right kind of in the heart of it is where that whole BIM thing took place, right? So Revit and SketchUp software in my field of architecture and design, those are the BIM softwares where we're doing the building and the information modeling, right? And so they kind of came into existence in the year 2000, which is when we started to see this rise of the software starting to do the thinking for you. And there's good and bad in there, right? I've seen it in the classroom. I see it in professional practice. You've got to be able to kind of manage that beast in order for your creative thought process not to be lost in it. So um, the question is not if we use AI in teaching architecture and interior design, but the real question is where. Where does it fit in to the design process? Because we don't want to compromise the need for the human reaction or the human interaction and the creative license, right? I use that term a lot in my classroom, the creative license that my students have when they're designing things, right? And even as I'm working with clients on projects, and I talk a lot about the creative license, because what we want to make sure that we don't do is turn design into this robotic field, right? Um, there's a place and a time for robotics, but architecture and design, you got to be careful with that. And so the design process is where I decided to try to incorporate artificial intelligence into my classroom projects, just to see where it would manifest itself and how it would come out in the end and how my students would respond to it. So I looked at it in a couple different ways. Here in the Herron School of Art and Design, we have a design thinking process, right? And I kind of refer to this more as the academic model, where in the classroom when we're teaching, we're talking about understanding your project and your client base, defining it, doing that whole design procedural part of ideate, prototyping, and evaluating. You do a design, idea, you prototype it, you build it, you might do a 3D print of it, you might build a model of it, a physical model, and then you evaluate it to see, is it hitting the mark? And then you start to talk about how are you going to execute this design in terms of putting together a set of instructions or a set of drawings, and then the delivery process, right? So this is more of the academic model that we use in the classroom. Comparing that to the more professional practice model, which is where we're specifically going through the phases of design, and we use the more professional terminology of pre-design, schematic design, design development, and getting to the point of developing the construction documents where we can then hand it off to the contractor, and that person is doing the construction administration and the building of the actual process, and developing the thing, like whatever the thing is you're designing, if it's a building, if it's a space, if it's a piece of furniture, whatever the thing is. And then you review it, you observe it, you do what we call a post-occupancy evaluation of it, where you see it in use for a while, and then you go back and you start to study, okay, did it work? If it didn't work, where did it fail? If it worked great and we're going to duplicate it, how can we make it even better the next time around, right? We then compare that to the third process of design thinking, which is more of the research model, right? Where we're starting to look a little bit more at the parts and pieces in modules, right? So that first module of inspiration, where we're understanding and observing. The second one is the ideation phase, right? And then the last one is the implementation phase. And so in a research model of design process thinking, we're trying to go all the way through from beginning to end so that we can then see where the findings are, right? Not necessarily how great or creative the design was, but what were we able to find, right? And so when we look at all three of those design process thinking tools in one, I decided to, in my classroom, figure out, okay, where can I input artificial intelligence in there? And so I went back to our Herron-based model, and I thought, okay, if I can incorporate AI right in between steps 2 and 3, so as where we've defined the idea and we're getting ready to ideate it, can we utilize artificial intelligence there? And then after we do the ideation and we build the prototype, before we evaluate it, can we incorporate AI again into that process? Because what that allows us to do is to create a design baseline, right? So we have a baseline of understanding for the potential outcomes. It promotes a sense of growth potential within the project, right? Because we do our own internal thinking first as we understand and define it. Then we go to the tool and say, okay, can you give us more information to think about or to consider, right? So it needs to happen prior to the ideation and the sketching, prior to your personal development of drawings, or the thing, as I should say in my classroom, and then after the design development prototype, right? It's kind of where we're fitting it in. So the way that this project worked for me is I've got 3 different case studies. I did one in the fall of 2025. I'm currently doing one in the spring 2026. And then we're going to do another one in fall of 2026 and kind of see where it lands, right? Analyzing the studios and how the AI and the formal process is working for everybody. So in the fall of 2025, we worked on a project here in Indianapolis, Indiana. It is the Kuntz Stadium project, and it is a rugby stadium. Well, it was, I think, a football stadium way back 30, 40 years ago, right? And it's been kind of abandoned for many, many years, but now it is going to become the new home of a rugby team that's going to be moving here to Indianapolis at some point in the next couple of years. And so the owners contacted me and said, hey, we need some additional help studying a particular part of the site that didn't make it into the original budget of the renovation. And that is a pavilion on that campus of that rugby site that they're going to be using for coaches' offices and for team um, study sessions. And there's also going to be a small part of the facility that's going to be used for the training staff, right, to treat injuries and or rehabbing for their players, right? And so we're trying to figure out, okay, how do we go about transforming this space to meet the needs of this rugby team, right? Neither myself nor my students that worked on this project with me in the class knew anything about rugby. So it was a pretty large learning curve, right? But what it did allow us to do was to take our design process, incorporate this kind of AI component into it, and see if it allowed us to enhance the deliverable to the client, right? So we're looking at where the algorithms we were able to generate and personalize the layouts based on the design research we had already done, and how that could help us give a more succinct and insightful deliverable to our client. And as well, what I really wanted to pay attention to was how it impacted creativity. Was it a positive impact or a negative impact on creativity? This current spring semester, we're kind of using the same process, but on a different project. So we're studying a space over in our campus center. We use the term campus center on our campus. In essence, it's our student union building. It's a 3-story building. It's pretty massive. And there is a lower level below ground that the campus has kind of studied over time, and it's reinvented itself a couple of times, but they're trying to figure out still, how do we make the best use of this large amount of space? And so my students and I right now are studying a redesign or a repurpose of the space. And we're just now at the point in the semester where we are incorporating AI into our design research, and how that is then going to allow us to generate more design ideas. So as we get into then their creative space making, generative ideas for the space, they can utilize the AI tool to kind of kickstart their ideation phase, right? So it is a work in progress right now. However, I will say that it's been a different process the second time around, because I think the students, I mean, word travels among students, and so the students are a little bit more open to utilizing the AI tool to help them do creative thinking, right? Whereas the first time around, there was a lot of hesitation, right? Art and design students in general, which I was kind of surprised by, are very hesitant, and really non-committal on using AI tools. A lot of them didn't even know how to use them, which I thought, um, my interpretation going into it was going to be completely opposite, but it wasn't. They had no knowledge of how to use it at all. So I found myself really kind of teaching them as I was learning it as well. And then as we move into the fall semester of 2026, we're going to try to run that same process one more time and see if, one, where the similarities across all 3 projects, where the variations, where the differences. And then also what I'm hoping to be able to figure out is the 2 locations where I've incorporated AI into our design thinking process. Is that the right location? Or do I need to shift my thinking and put it in sooner, maybe put it in later? Maybe it needs to be a part of the assessments after the project is already done. Not quite sure yet, but I'm trying to stay open-minded on where those findings are going to flush themselves out in the process. So as I tease out all 3 of those processes when we're done, I'd be curious to see kind of where my thinking may change on it as well. So what I did was I created a how might we statement, right? And we use this term a lot in Herron for all of our project work, we try to stay pretty consistent as a faculty in the department around how we package our projects so that our students' work has some similarity as they move from class to class and course to course. So the how might we statement that we came up with was how might we encourage a more efficient use of artificial intelligence in the AI/creative learning spaces, right? So what that means is we're talking about integrating AI into the studio classes so that it enhances learning or hopefully enhances the learning outcome for the students. So we might encourage students to be more efficient in using AI in their creative spaces. We might encourage a more efficient use of AI in creative spaces when we're demonstrating the results, right? Demonstrating the results early on could give a student the ability to hone in on a skill in architecture and design that is critical. You have to be able to see the end result before you start the design, right? Some people intuitively can do that. They're just born with that nature in the design field. Others have to actually learn how to see it because our clients depend on us to be able to see that end result as we're giving them our vision on how the design is going to look and how it's going to work. We're in essence, we're selling the design to them early on before we get into the crux of making that idea work. And then we might encourage a more efficient use of it to show improved creativity for the students. There's never anything wrong with, ultra creativity. And at times, I mean, I do have design students who have a strong interest in design and architecture, but they may think to themselves, but I'm not the most creative person. I'm just interested in this field. So could this tool allow them to kickstart or jumpstart their creativity? Just like writers have writer's block, it is possible for designers to have designer's block. I've run into it myself. So maybe this is a tool that can kind of help overcome that particular hurdle when you're working on a project. All right. So the encouraging part of the creative space, we're trying to become more results oriented, right? And we're trying to show the improved creativity. So there are challenges and some considerations that we have to think about, right? So the challenges of integrating AI, um, everything's a financial challenge in higher ed right now, right? So there is the challenge of the high costs that could come with using some of this software, right? It could require a major investment in software and training, right? I had never used AI before last fall semester, never used it. And so the amount of time that it took for me to just kind of get my arms around how to use it. And our university, like I would imagine most universities, we have our own AI platform that we encourage faculty and students to use. And so it took some time to kind of figure out my way around that. So there is not only the barrier of maybe the investment, and I'm sure our university invested a lot into that tool and building it, but also the learning curve, right? There is a steep learning curve for faculty and staff. And I will admit, I had some students who were, who pushed back a lot on, I really don't want to learn this. And it took some convincing to say, it's not just about artificial intelligence, but it really is about you adapting to the world around you. Um, and then the ethical concerns, right, regarding AI and its role in the design process and decision making. Um, I had a couple of students that really had concerns about, is it ethical to be using artificial intelligence to create a design that we're then going to try to sell to somebody else, right? So getting your arms around that part of the process and trying to figure out where is the line, right? And so the way that I kind of described it in the classroom was it would be no different than if we're using an architectural precedent, from Le Corbusier or Frank Lloyd Wright or whomever it might be, and we're taking one of their precedents and we're trying to use it on a project. Well, AI is a precedent setter, really. It gives you, an idea, and you might say, how can I take that idea and enhance it and make it work for my project, right? So those are the challenges, but there are also some really kind of cool considerations to think about as well when you're implementing it. Um, Enhancing the learning outcomes, right? And preparing students for the evolving design landscape. It does not change, right? The design landscape and technology, it's not going to stand still for anybody. So we're giving our students yet one more thing that they can use in their toolkit to introduce themselves into the design profession. Continuous updates to technology, right? So it forces us to stay up to date with the technology so that our students are not walking out the door as dinosaurs, right? And then they're equipped with the latest tools and practices for their field. As I tell students quite often, so in addition to being a full-time professor here at the university in the summers, I still work for an architecture firm. And I tell my students all the time, when I go back to the firm in the summer and we have student interns coming in from all these different universities, they are leading the pack in the studio of knowing all the technology. We lean on them for, okay, what's the latest and greatest out there? Because once you're in the field and you're practicing, it's sometimes difficult to stay up to date and get training. I kind of have a built-in advantage because 8 out of the 10 months I'm on a college campus, right? And I'm invested in learning a lot of the latest and greatest software. But a lot of my colleagues at the firm are not. So they lean on students to be that cutting edge tool that we have that will maybe allow us to get a project that we possibly wouldn't be able to get previously. So the way that the project kind of worked, that we piloted, um, the students, they completed all the traditional design programming work. So we went through our projects, we met with our client, we created our criteria matrix, we did all of our building code research, we did all the traditional stuff we would do to have a clear understanding of our client, their wants, their needs, how the facility needs to function for them, the amount of square footage we're working with, the adjacencies, daylighting, all those things. We went through the entire process of getting our understanding of here's the project, here's what the client wants. Can we deliver this to them? We then went right into our basic design sketch mode, right? Where we start to figure out, okay, where can some of these things work for the client? Because the first thing we try to always do on a project when you're doing design, architecture, interior design, any of those things, you're trying to figure out, are there any deal breakers? Is the client asking for something that the facility just cannot do, right? So we're trying to figure out where are the deal breakers and where maybe we have uncovered some things that the client didn't even know we could do within their space, right? So we did our typical, what we call bubble diagrams, blocking diagrams, design sketches. And these are just a few examples of those on the screen where we start to figure out space, right, for our client. And then we went into what I call in the classroom the mood board, right? Where we start to say, okay, we have an idea of what you want. We think we can deliver what you need in the space. We then went through some of the diagrammatic space planning and laying out the facility for the client. And now we're getting into what's the look and feel going to be, right? Are there any specific color theories that we're going to use to justify the uses of the space? Are there any specific finishes that we're going to use or products that justify the use of the space? Are there any specific lighting schemes or strategies that we're going to use to make the space function, right? And we put all those things together in a couple of what we call mood boards, where we then are able to get kind of the client's initial reaction, where they could say, yes, you're hitting the mark, or you're not hitting the mark, and here's where we think you're not hitting the mark, right? So these examples I have on the screen here are showing where my students are trying to figure out, okay, you're going to be having a lot of different uses in this building. You've got some office space for your coaches. You've got some training space for the trainers and the team. You're going to have some team meeting spaces where they're going to be reviewing film and having prep sessions for their next game or match. And then in addition to that, this particular facility is going to be used, I think in 2030 when the National Rugby World Games are going to come to Indianapolis. And so the space is going to be used by a lot of different teams rotating through the space. So they also needed to have a little bit of complexities to it so that others can kind of easily adapt to using the space. So the students completed these traditional kind of design development research processes. I'm just going to go back real quick. So we did the programming stuff, we did the space planning stuff, and then we did the mood board stuff. We took all of that learning that we did, and then we dumped it into AI and said, okay, what could the physical space actually now look like? Because our algorithms, they're smarter. We're able to tell it precisely, here's the building code that we're trying to hit. Here's the space allocation we're trying to hit. Here are the color theories that we're using based on evidence, evidence-based design research. Here are the acoustical values we're trying to hit based on evidence-based design. Here are the materials that we're going to be using and why, because we know that they're going to have the longevity. So what this does, it allows us to quickly go back to our client and say, okay, based on all of our research and all of our meetings with you, we think this is what your space could look like, right? In some key areas, not all the areas, but some key areas. And then we get that feedback from the client, and this allows them to kind of then see a real life visual of, is this conference room going to work for us? Is this meeting space where we're going to have coaches coming in and docking, and we're going to have small team meetings, small coaches meetings, position team meetings, and that kind of thing. The area where we're going to have kind of our social space for our team to congregate or for our trainers to use. Is this hitting the mark a little bit? And the hard part that we found in this part of the project was explaining to our client, these are artificial intelligence deliverables of what your space could look like. Doesn't mean it's going to be exactly like this, but what we think is that we can get really close to this once we start doing the design and picking all your very specific finishes. But this is based on vetted data that we've already done because we did the mood boards and we did the space planning. So we know that the strategies here that we've incorporated in terms of design and architecture and space and people movement and people-centered design, we know all those things work because we've already done that research. We've just now asked AI to kind of help us fast forward the ideation part of it so we can get that initial client feedback and have a clear understanding of, are we hitting the mark or not, right? So all of that to say, it's still a work in progress. And the project that we're doing this current semester for our campus center, we've just now, like I said, gotten to this phase. And so in a couple of weeks, we'll have, again, another set of kind of AI generated tools to share. It creates some really cool discussion points, which is really important when you're working on projects that, especially large publicly consumed projects, it's a good thing to be able to get some teasers out there because you can kind of gauge the general public's response to your design ideas that way before you go too far down that road, and then it's hard to kind of reel it back in and make changes. So that's the presentation on how I was able to kind of incorporate AI into this creative placemaking field. So I guess I'll stop there and see if there are any questions or comments about how we did what we did and maybe can enhance it.
Thank thank you so much. It looks like Charlie O has a question. So
Let's
Charlie O, could you unmute yourself?
see. I'm trying to
Hi,
get my
can you
screen
hear
so I can
me?
see the chat.
Hello?
Yes.
Oh, can you hear me?
Mhm. Yes.
Oh,
I
okay. A little bit. Let me take you off of I'm so sorry. I
No,
had
you're clear. I
my
can hear you fine.
Oh, okay, cool, cool. I'll make it really quick. Thank you so much. This was very informative. My question is in regards to research that was just published by Rand Corporation. And it was research of middle school students and high school students. And they were asked specifically about their feelings on AI.
Mhm,
And the research showed that, more than half of the students expressed concern, grave concern about AI deteriorating their critical thinking. That was
mhm,
the overarching sort of takeaway, is that they're really concerned about their critical thinking, which is very interesting. Um, how would you, first of all, what do you think about that, those findings? And then are you seeing that reflected in your work with your students, that they're specifically concerned about critical thinking? And if so, how are you helping them to work through that, or, you know, fill
mhm,
that gap?
mhm, mhm. So yeah, I mean, I applaud those young students that are concerned about critical thinking, right? Because I think, the assumption is that all of our young people are surrounded by technology every day. So I think sometimes the assumption is, well, of course they want to use it all, right? But specifically in creative fields, um, I find in my discussions, even with my students, that that's not the case. Like I said, when I first started introducing this to my students, I'm in an art school on a large college campus, and art students are creative and quirky and secretive with their ideas, right? And so I I completely get how they would be intimidated by not only this artificial intelligence tool kind of overriding their creative thinking, but also, man, I don't want this tool to one day take the place of me and and have AI generating all of the art and
يعني
sculpture
انا بعمله فوق بحث علمي.
and
بني ادم بيفقد احساسه بالفلوس بعد 525 الف دولار. لما يصير معك 525 الف بطل، حتى بطل يحس بالفلوس،
Musa,
بطل
could
لها
you
قيمه.
mute yourself, please?
all right, sorry. So I do see that there is some I mean, there's some challenges there. One of the things that I tried to make sure that I did when I introduced it into my classes was I encouraged my students, one, look at it just as another tool, another option that you could have in your toolkit. And just like any other tool that a designer has in their toolkit, you're not going to use it on every project. You might use it once a year, on a project. You might use it once every 2 years. There are design softwares that I've learned over the years of practicing and studying and teaching design that I might use every now and then the moment I'm ready to use it, I have to think to myself, man, it's been a minute since I used it. I got to go brush up on it to make sure that I know how to use it. Um, but I also made it clear to my students, you can't just jump into using AI before you've done your work. Once you do your work and your research, then your algorithms that you put into AI are much more succinct. And now you're driving the tool isn't driving you. Um, but I do get it. I mean, I completely understand kind of the fear. And I would hate for specifically my field of architecture and design to be completely driven by AI. I'd hate it. Um, so I think it's important that we learn the positives of it. I also think in my field, I've seen other pieces of technology come along, and the initial thought was it's going to take over the industry. And it was popular for a moment, and then we kind of migrated back to the way that we want to do it, and we just use it as a part of the toolkit. So
I have a question.
Yes.
Fantastic presentation. This
Thank
is good to know, and it's really good to see a creative talk about the advantages and disadvantages. And I thought the presentation was fascinating. Just a few things here. So, a few friends of mine and I were talking earlier this week, and we're talking about how you should not outsource your thinking to artificial intelligence. And so, like, where we ended up going was in the age of AI, uh, high level thinkers will be in great demand. This is something that we've been contemplating lately. Like just because you use AI doesn't mean that you're a high level thinker, right?
you.
Um, I mean, we see businesses not even employing entry level workers anymore because entry level work can be done by artificial intelligence, right? But in the art and architectural realm, your talk prompted me to think about, and I'm looking at my notes here as you were presenting, the Eames or the Ames lounge chair, right?
Mhm.
Um, a classic work, right, by Charles Ames.
Mhm.
Uh, we're here in Chicago, so like the Mies van der Rohe buildings and like the Jeannie Gang buildings are just phenomenal here, right? Jeannie Gang changing the game by saying, isn't it sad that when you go to most cities, the skyscrapers are rectangular and square? And Jeannie Gang, a woman architect, a master architect, her buildings in Chicago have curves like a woman. The St. Regis building, it's got curves. The Aqua building, it has curves. So she's changed the game when it comes to that. So my question is this: when it comes to form and function, and the creative, Darrell Nickolson and students, um, should we use AI more for function and leave the human quality to forms, or are they symbiotic? I'll leave it at that.
Gotcha. So it's funny, as you were talking, right before you said it, I wrote down form and function, right? And my students probably get sick of hearing me say form versus function because I am always in the classroom. I'm always asking them, which one's more important, right? Do I design something and I force the user to adapt to that form? Or do I understand the function of the user and I design something to what they're going to be doing, right? Um, while I don't think that in the classroom I specifically said it, I'm pretty sure if you ask my students, they would probably say that I lean more towards using AI to understand functionality, because then your creative mind will come up with the form, right? I think that's what they would say, right? Because I think subconsciously in the back of my mind, I am probably just as concerned about them leaning too much on technology to do the creative thinking for them, right? So, and like I said, I don't recall ever saying it specifically in class, but I'm almost sure that my students would say, yeah, what he's really telling us and what he's saying, and maybe even my commentary back to them when they presented these works was, okay, did AI help you figure out something that now you're going to use when you go design this thing, right? Um, because I don't think there's any tool you should not use to try to understand your client, right? When you're designing something, so I have a perfect example. I'm here in Indianapolis, and like I said, I'm looking out my window, and we're designing this huge new athletic facility for our men's and women's basketball team and volleyball team. And right down the road is Lucas Oil Stadium where the Colts play. And I call it the world's largest convertible. We've got this huge football stadium with a convertible top, and we let down the convertible top maybe 3 times every year. It's like, okay, that convertible top cost 1/3 of the entire cost of the building. Was it a good use of money, right? So while the form looks really cool, did we really understand the function of putting a convertible stadium in the Midwest where it rains and snows 7, 8 months out of the year. And if you open that top and it starts raining, the entire facility is compromised. So I think there's no tool you should not use to try to understand the functionality. But I think when it comes to the form, I'd love to see that left to the real creative mind, not a piece of technology. Right.
I love that. I love that answer.
That's just my thought, right? But I'm a little bit of a traditionalist, right? I mean, I graduated from college back in the 90s, which seems like a long, long, long time ago now, but my professors they were old school, right? And I think that some of that's still in the back of my mind.
It's like watching two people sing the same song, and like one person, the song's heartfelt. It's the
Yeah,
same lyrics, the
same
same
lyric.
music. The other
Yes.
person is mechanical. There's
Yeah.
no feeling. You didn't move me, but it's the same song. And
Yeah.
technically, it really isn't the same song because the form is different.
Yeah. The interesting thing is like thinking back to Charlie's question, um, I feel like our young people, and when I say young people, the generation of students I'm teaching right now, all the way down to our grade school kids, I feel like they are looking at technology in that way. There's a little bit of, man, I think this is kind of overtaking us a little bit too much. And we've got to be able to we've got to hone it in so that we use it and we understand it, but it doesn't replace us. Right. And I see some concern in that, which I think is good. I think that's a good thing.
And we have two questions in the chat. I don't know if individuals wanted to unmute and speak or, have our guest read their questions and respond.
So I do see them. Are there any copyright challenges associated with AI generated concepts? Interesting question. So I had a discussion with the folks on our campus that managed and continue to manage Indiana University's AI tool. And I asked that question, like, okay, we generate these images, at least from my point of view, we're generating images and pictures, right? Who owns it? And they're like, well, you do. You generated it based on your facts and your findings. You're using the university's tool, no different than if a student's sitting in a classroom and they do a sketch, well, that student kind of owns that sketch, right? That's the way that it was explained to us, right? Seems really simplistic. Now, I know I have colleagues on campus who teach English and science and medicine, and their discussions about AI are very different than mine, right? So I can only speak from my point of view of what we're developing, which are just images. But I do know that, AI it's kind of a beast to manage when you're teaching math and English and that kind of thing. So I can't speak to those kind of copyright scenarios. So hopefully that answers your question. And I do see another question here. Which AI is best for design in your opinion? From Art Education. So um, I don't know that I'm educated enough to say which one is best because we used our university platform of ChatGPT, right? And the reason we used our university platform was because it didn't put a limit on how many times a student could throw in an algorithm and get an outcome. What I learned when I first started using AI was some of these platforms, you can only generate so many images before it says, okay, you got to come back tomorrow. You can't generate any more images. So we only use ChatGPT in my courses because that's what Indiana University wants us to use. There's a follow-up here. It says, my students have questions about AI bias. They're concerned with the nature of the data that drives generative creative content. Where does the data come from? How does the students' knowledge from the classroom influence design? Will it change over time? Um,
Sorry, that was me. I had a ton of digressions there, but this.
no. I'm trying to digest the question here. Um, okay, so the AI bias. And again, I'm gonna frame my response and my experience with my students in the classroom about this. I don't know that we had any discussion about AI bias, to be quite honest. My students, I thought, did a pretty good job of, based on all the content I put into the AI tool, and this is what it generated, they kind of took it for what it was, which was this is their idea of what my space could look like based on all the information I gave it. Some of them were clear to admit that I don't, but I didn't like it. It wasn't what I was thinking. Others said, yeah, it kind of did hit the mark of what I was thinking, and it's kind of cool to see it um, in a real life scenario before I start working on my design, because now I have a target to try to hit as I'm working on my design. And what didn't make it onto the slides here, one of the things I did ask them to do was to do an assessment of the AI images that were generated and to tell me where did it miss the mark for you, right? And so some of them said, yeah, I didn't like the way that the lighting bounced off the wall here, or I didn't like how now that I see my windows in place, it doesn't really fit the mood of the room I was trying to get, or some things like that. So I don't know that we've really dealt with any of those biases. Where does the data come from? I mean, I wish I knew, right? I
Well,
just call it the AI tool, right? Not
that was just a food for thought question as
yeah,
they were asking me. So
yeah,
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 that's what they're wondering. Well, who are the human raters for the data?
yeah, right. And I don't know the answer to that question, but your last one there, will it change over time? I would imagine it will, right? Because I think, like, at least in my profession, there have been a lot of pieces of technology that have come along the way that we thought was going to revolutionize how we do design and architecture and how we build buildings. And then we realized that, man, we've got to go back and assess and modify this a little bit, because there's still procedures to how the buildings themselves are being built. You still need people, right? And so the tools are great, but I don't know that we're ever going to get to a point where we don't need the people and the creative minds, because there are some things in the field, like I tell clients all the time, I can design anything you want on paper. Doesn't mean it's going to work in real life, right? So being out there in the field and seeing it, and sometimes having to make in the field adjustments when you're building vertical structures, that's an ever changing thing, right? That's always changing. So I do see another question here. Are students being coached on how to have these potential challenging questions with clients and customers? Yeah, in my class, I mean, we specifically told our client a part of our design process we're going to be using on this project is we're going to get to a critical point and we're going to throw it into AI and see what it gives us. And then we're going to do a comparative analysis of that to what we come up with and see how close the two of them are, right? And see where we can learn from the AI stuff to maybe make ours better. So yeah, that we actually did have those conversations. And so I feel like we're coaching that, and I'm coaching the students on how to do that a little bit. Mm-hmm.
Are there any other questions for our wonderful guest today? Any final questions? I guess I had a question. So what was fascinating was your students' reactions as creatives, and the fear of displacement. I guess that's the maybe the biggest concerned that, people that are entering professional fields or, finishing college and going out to work is, am I going to be replaced? I mean, do you have any wisdom about the answer to that question? Will they be replaced? Dr. McClendon mentioned that, companies are not hiring as many entry-level workers. So is that fear reasonable? And if so, what can educators do to prepare students to not be obsolescent or not be displaced?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, I mean, my tunnel vision in terms of industry, in architecture, interior design, and engineering. I was in our engineering school on campus for 20 years before I moved up to the art school. So I've worked with all three of those sectors of students and in industry. I cross paths with all of them. And I have to say, I have not seen or heard any data that says in my industries that artificial intelligence is stifling the hiring process for young people. I haven't seen where there is a discounting of bringing in entry level designers and architects and engineers. In fact, I've seen across the board here in the United States where the hiring process has really picked up because we're constantly evolving and growing in terms of how we design buildings, so the need is there. My students were, yeah, there's a lot of hesitation there about just using the technology. I think they see and hear how artificial intelligence is impacting other industries, and the assumption is it's going to make its way into ours. And I'm not saying that they're right or wrong because like I said, I see and hear other colleagues on my campus talk about how AI impacts what, their teaching and learning environment. And I always say, man, I don't have those concerns in my classroom. Uh, and maybe it's because in design, 2 + 2 doesn't always equal 4 in design. It's not that simple. There's always an ever-changing paradigm to how you might see something. So I can't say that I see it being a thing that replaces people. I think it just becomes another tool. And to be quite honest, when I look at some of the design software we use, like I said, I feel like AI has been around for a while. We just didn't call it that. And people in the design profession, we've gotten used to the software being able to kind of talk back to us and say, we think you might want to do this. But if as long as you can learn how to tell the software, hey, thanks for your idea, but I really don't want your idea right now. I'm going to go with my idea. That's where I think we kind of are able to kind of buck the trend a little bit.
Well, thank you very much. I mean, if there's not any final questions, I'd like to, express my gratitude to our guest. And I think that's the end of the webinar. Thank you so much.
No problem.
Thank you everyone for coming. Thank you everyone for coming.